Before we jump in. Oh gosh, we forgot the recording. Okay,
right,
I'm going to start over. No worries, take two.
Okay.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Our UX strategist Kent Robinson is going to be talking to us about building appealing products and how we can leverage our understanding of psychology to that end. Thank you for joining us, Kent. I am Isabel Berner, the Director of Product Management and Design at Def Method. Wanted to share a little bit about Def Method before I let Kent take over. So for those of you who don't know us, we are a New York City-based custom software consultancy. We leverage proven methodologies such as Agile, Lean, Extreme Programming, and test-driven development. And we deliver high quality and valued software to our clients. We try and help them achieve important business outcomes and solve meaningful problems for their customers or users. We at Def Method, we believe in the integrity of providing quality code and in continuously learning so that we're always the best for our clients. You can learn all about it. We have a brand new website designed by our very own Kent Robinson. You can check it out at defmethod.com. You'll be able to learn about our team, the services we offer, and the roles we have open. We're hiring for a bunch of different roles right now. So if you like what you hear today, please apply for one of our open roles. We're looking for some product managers, designers, engineers. There's an HR role open and a business development role as well. So please don't hesitate to apply. Lastly, this is going to be an interactive webinar. So Kent's going to give us a bunch of fun little brain teasers, but I believe we'll also have some time at the end for questions. So make sure that you gather those as you listen to Kent. All right, welcome Kent. Thank you so much and take it away.
Okay, yeah, thanks Isabel for the introduction. As she said, my name's Kent. I am a designer here at Def Method. The topic is design and psychology, building better products. This has actually been something that I've been thinking about for like 5 months now, because as some of you may know, this webinar was supposed to happen 3 months ago. But at the very moment that I was supposed to be presenting, my wife delivered our son. And so he actually disrupted it. And I told him he was in trouble for disrupting this webinar, but he didn't hear me out. So just to start, I wanted to show you the culprit real quick. Just because why not? Figured I'd show him off. He's pretty cute. Okay, let's jump into this. What I'm going to be talking about is the Gestalt principles of visual perception. Gestalt is a German word for form or shape. And if you speak German, I'm sorry, I just butchered that word. But in the early 20th century, these German psychologists had these ideas that organisms perceive entire patterns or configurations and not just merely individual components. So they were trying to understand how we perceive the world around us, how we take in information and use that to our leverage. So if you've read anything about this, or maybe you've even heard this quote, that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. So really that's kind of the basis for what we're going to be talking about today. And my hope or goal is that we can explore how these principles can inform our visual designs. But first I wanted to show you the inspiration for my topic. It's actually inspired by one of my favorite subreddits called Confusing Perspective. For you, those of you that don't know what Reddit is, maybe there's a couple of you. It's basically like the front page of the internet. It's where anything that happens, people will post it and then talk about it. And you can make subreddits where you can talk about specific topics. And one of them happens to be a subreddit of people posting photos that are initially very confusing. It's kind of fun. People will post things and your initial take is like, okay, I don't quite understand what's going on here. And then we all have a discussion to figure out what the heck's going on. And sometimes it even leads to hilarious drawings. So I will just show you some of them. So for example, one picture was a floating trash can. Obviously the trash can is not floating. That is a water spot in front of the trash can. But you get the idea. One head, two bodies. I guess I couldn't come up with a better title for this one. It is obviously a man holding a baby, but it is really hard to tell where the baby's head starts and the man's head begins. So it took me a while of looking at this. This is actually the child in front with the hat and sunglasses. The man is not wearing the sunglasses. He is behind, and I gave him a terrible outline. Sorry, man. Stretch Armstrong at the bar. Just from the initial look, it looks like this woman's arm is stretching all the way across her friend's. That is actually not her arm. That is the shirt, and it's an unfortunate placement. Maybe they should have switched spots. This one's actually my favorite one. Again, I'm not sure on the title. I'm melting. But if you look at the woman with the coat right here draped over, it looks like her body has melted and then her feet are just kind of dangling out the bottom. And for some reason, I couldn't get this one, but it's not that hard once you like actually look closely and you look at the details. You can see, and sorry if I'm giving these away way too quickly, but you can see that she's sitting behind the woman in front. So here's a girl with chicken legs. But then once you actually look at it, you can see she's holding a bag of popcorn. I'll go back just so you can see. And lastly, this one's really good too. It's titled it Superman Dad. I put this comment in because it kind of explains what I think you see when you initially look at this photo. The guy in the photo actually posted this because he was confused by it too. He's like, where are my legs? So the dad in the back. And someone said, it looks like you were shot out of a cannon. Cannon is behind you and you were flying straight into the camera with that determined look on your face. And if you look closely, you literally can't see his legs. It does look like he's like planking on nothing, doing some kind of like weird levitation. Some of the Redditors drew some interesting images to try to explain what they thought was going on. So thank you to Grifty Lifts, wherever you are out there. And I thought this one was pretty good. Drew's 232, thank you. I'm assuming that's what it was. But again, just pretty confusing how you couldn't see his legs at all. Okay, so what do these confusing pictures have to do with design? Well, it shows that our perception tries to optimize what we are seeing. So we quickly, we make quick judgments of what we see, and our mind tries to like grab onto general shapes and first, and then group that information, even if the information isn't correct. In a sense, like your brain is always trying to make sense of the world by comparing previous experiences or visual patterns and connecting the dots. So, for example, the floating trash can, it wasn't actually floating, but we've probably all seen shadows millions of times and things causing shadows millions of times that our mind immediately caused us to see a trash can floating. Same with the woman with the very long arm. Her arm wasn't actually that long, but the colors connecting her sweater to the sweater of the woman next to her caused us to make this perception that wasn't correct, but our mind went there where it connected these two things. So now why does this happen? The Gestalt psychologists don't really explain why, but most likely to allow us to make like rapid judgments about the world around us. Maybe it was evolutionary, so that we could quickly perceive a lion coming at us instead of like trying to make out all the details. We could easily make out that that was a lion, and then we could run away and not die. I'm not sure. I didn't get in too much into the epistemology of it, but that would be interesting for maybe like a future webinar. So some of the key principles of this psychology that kind of illustrate this psychology is emergence, reification, multistability, and invariance. So these are pretty interesting. The first one being exactly what I was talking about. The whole is identified before the parts. So when you look at the image on the right, we initially see it as a woman. You don't actually see it as like a little black dot and a black blob, but that's what it is. Our mind immediately goes to this being a woman. So we identify her first as a whole, and then you start to identify the parts. Yeah, the second one is reification. So it's a principle that shows that the mind fills in the gaps. Objects are perceived as containing more spatial information than what is actually present. So this isn't an actual sphere. There's these small black shapes, but our mind fills in that spatial space to inform us that that is a ball. This one's my favorite one, multistability. The mind seeks to avoid uncertainty. So there's a tendency of ambiguous perceptual experiences to pop back and forth unstably between two or more alternative interpretations. So it's really hard for our mind to hold on to two different ways of looking at the same thing. It will either tend to grab onto one or the other. So like for this one, you might see the vase, or you might see the two faces on each side. Another example of this, and I like this one a lot, is this cube, where if you look at it for a while, you can kind of see it going in two directions. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I actually shaded it in so you could see. So one way you could see it is that it's coming forward and down to the left. And another way is it's going up and to the right. But if you go back and look at the shape and you stare at it, it's actually really hard to see both at the same time. Your mind will immediately pop to one or the other, or at least it does for me. So, and then the last one, invariance. We're good at recognizing similarities and differences. So it's a property of perception in which simple objects are recognized independent of their rotation, translation, and scale. So basically, we're really good at deducing what an object is, even if it's coming at it from a different angle. So seeing it from the back, from the front, if it's turned, twisted, skewed. I think these images came from a study where they showed people these different groupings, and they were easily were able to see that the objects were the same and see which ones there weren't. They were able to identify that this one had a cutout, even though it's skewed and twisted and upside down. It shows that we can easily perceive that they're the same, even though it's from a different angle. So, okay, so something to keep in mind, that these are not necessarily separate modules to model individually, but are different aspects of a single unified dynamic mechanism, basically meaning that we don't utilize one of these at a time. It's kind of something that happens all at once. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, so getting into what this has to do with design, from those principles, the Gestalt psychologists came up with these laws of grouping. This kind of gets into what we can leverage for building designs. These laws can help inform and instruct us in ways that we can make our products more appealing and more intuitive, so people can understand them without like a lot of mental costs associated with interacting with the products. So let's take a look at some of these. The first one, law of proximity. Objects that are placed near each other will be visually grouped together. So from this image, you can see you can make out 2 and even 3 groups, right? Just simply using this white space here, even though all of these objects are the same shape, same size, and same color, simply separating them makes us perceive these as different groups. We see this as a group, see this as a group, and probably even this is like a minor group, right? So as an example of when we're building our UIs, like one example of like how that can be applied is just simply in using white space. So for example, here, every element on the page is spaced out the exact same. But if we leverage this and use white space, it makes it so that we can more easily and quickly identify what is associated with what. So we're not associating maybe field required with the email from the item above. We can quickly identify that there's 2 separate fields and their associated values right there. So Here's an example of a bad use of white space. It's from a USPS form, and apparently a lot of people ended up filling out this form incorrectly because the space between primary business name, trade name for this field C was so far down that it was associated with D. And this happens actually a lot on like government forms and like I'm sure a bunch of others where they're trying to jam a lot of different stuff into a tight space. And so a lot of people would put the primary business name on field D, but it actually went in C. So just an example of like a poor use of grouping. So people naturally group this with this and not that. So, and I actually have a fun example about this. I filled out a title for a car. I sold a car a little while back, and the title form, I actually made this exact same mistake, and I put my name on the wrong form, and then it created like a huge mess because I filled out the form wrong, and then it messed up the cell, and then it took like 3 months to fix. So like there can be actual like real costs associated to bad UI and bad ways of showcasing what you're wanting the user to do. So yes, I paid the price for that. Maybe I should have known better, but maybe they should have made a better form. Okay, law 2. Law of common region. Objects that are shaped, that share an area within a boundary will be visually grouped together. So when you put some kind of border around a certain grouping and create a region, they will automatically be identified as being a part of a group. So it doesn't really have to be just a border. So for example, here are some items maybe in a list or something, and it's like you can see that they're separated, but like in order to help visually help the user identify them more quickly, it would be better to put like some kind of drop shadow or a box around them. This allows the user to more quickly identify each one of these as three separate groups and not necessarily a list of, all being grouped together. There's other ways to do this too. So like you can do it with different color backgrounds. So you can see here, even just the blue against the white, that's a grouping. And you will identify this as separate from everything else on the page. You can even do it with just lines. All of a sudden, if you put this line here, it helps group this menu away from these tags. You can do it with drop shadows, borders. It just helps us make those quick initial groupings and like reduce ambiguity. So yeah, law 3, law of similarity. Objects that are visually similar in size, shape, and color will be visually grouped together. So even though all these have different shades of blue, the mere fact that they are blue, that they have the exact same shape, that they have the exact same shot size, we naturally tend to put these objects together. For example, I guess I forgot to put that this is a bad example, but showing that these are not necessarily like a similar color palette and they're different in size. A better way to display this would be to center them, make the primary and secondary buttons the same size, and use like a similar color palette. So kind of just showing that like this is much easier and intuitive to see that these buttons are associated with each other compared to this. Okay. Number 3, law of continuation. Objects that are ordered in a line or curve appear to be related. So even though these objects are all the same size and color, and we can easily and quickly identify that these linear groups are associated with each other, even though maybe this one at the far right is curved, and this one that runs horizontally cuts through the other ones, and some of them share the same objects. We can identify 3 different lines here. And kind of to illustrate how we can use that in our UI, like when we're, so for example, on this one, we can easily and quickly see that these are associated horizontally with each other because we read left to right. That is like our natural inclination. But since these are all lined up using the same amount of spacing and lined up on a grid, you can also quickly associate that the ones vertically are associated. So you can see that these are all in the same grouping. They are all profile pictures. These are all names with some kind of like text and the timestamp for them. So number 5, law of closure. So objects that are visually incomplete will be perceived as a whole. Okay, so this one's kind of fun. So there's a few things that show us that what this is going to be. One, I think is just our experience. We've all seen stars. We know what they look like. So we are more easily able to fill in the gaps right here. And we know, okay, that 4th one's probably a star, but also the pattern that we see here shows us that. So even though it's not a star, we perceive it as such. So this is kind of a fun one to use in our UI to make it more like visually interesting and appealing. Like, so for example, you'll see this a lot, especially with mobile where like real estate is limited. You'll see like horizontal scrollers or things hanging off the edges. And even though we can't see this box, and we've all seen this a million times, we know that that is a box, right? And so it gives us an indication of what we can do with that. It shows us that there is more information to the right. Even though we can see the title and we can't actually see what that is, our mind fills in that gap. So yeah, law of closure. You can even do it on the bottom of this page here. You can see that there's an object here that's cut off. I didn't animate this one, but if you scroll down, it would show that there's more content down there. So we use this all the time. It's kind of how we get a lot more real estate out of pages that are, you know, limited in size on our phones or even our desktops. You'll see it a lot in logos too. It's kind of a fun use of engaging users in terms of like using like visual ambiguity and kind of like using negative space. So yeah, I just thought these ones were fun. Let's see. Oh yeah, another example. Using the fold at the bottom of a page. I kind of did this with the mobile one as well, but showing here that like if you use the fold, that information will indicate that the user can kind of continue down the page. Whereas maybe if they landed here and they didn't see anything at that fold, maybe they don't necessarily know that there's more information to be found. So you don't necessarily have to show all that information, but like giving them a snippet, their mind can complete that, and it kind of gives that indication to move forward. So okay, cool. So why does this matter when creating digital products? Well, first off, it improves usability. When we play to the mental models that people have and that they use in their daily interactions, it makes the experience that much better. It creates a kind of a similar interaction that people just intuitively have. So it also helps us create faster communication channels. If they're not having to struggle with figuring out what fields are associated with what titles, it helps us kind of get our point across of what we're trying to say and what we want them to do within our designs. The third point kind of hits on that too. It reduces those mental interaction costs and the the physical interaction costs. It reduces the strain that it causes on users. And that's a real thing. You can create all of us have been on either a website or some kind of mobile app where it wasn't intuitive enough, and maybe the information wasn't as clear enough, or maybe this is just being a designer, but maybe it wasn't aesthetically as pleasing enough, and you bounce off it. It causes bounce rates to go up, and people don't like using it. So being aware of these kind of natural visual perceptions that we have will help you build products that reduce these costs. And then, like I said, last one, they are more aesthetically pleasing. So yeah, I went through that a little quicker than I thought I was going to. Yeah, so I can share this link if anyone wants to look at these citations eventually, but yeah, maybe we could move to some questions, comments. I can speak to a little bit more of like how I incorporate this into my practices, but yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone if you have any questions about this. So.
Kent, I had a question for you. I'm curious to hear if there's a specific law that you think is violated most regularly in UX UI that we might come across day to day.
Good question. I wouldn't be able to speak 100% to which one might be violated the most, but I think the one that would be the most useful in terms of what we notice the most is probably be the law of grouping, utilizing white space, creating kind of enough breathing room in between objects and groupings really allows you to kind of isolate your eyes and your attention between groups so that nothing's muddied and you're not, I don't know, confusing one thing for the next. So that would be my take.
Interesting. And I'm curious, in redesigning our website, which of these were most top of mind for you in kind of design decisions that went into that?
Yeah, good question. Definitely that one, the law of grouping, but I also really tried to incorporate this with the law of closure. I noticed we had lots of areas that had kind of large sections where there wasn't a lot of indication of what might come next. So I tried to play with more kind of the viewport height to indicate if there's something kind of coming down the page. So yeah, so probably law of grouping and law of closures. The funny thing is when designing, I don't necessarily think specifically about any of these laws in as I'm going through. I'm like, okay, here's a law of closure. It's kind of more like creating something and going back and making sure that you're not doing anything that violates them more than actively incorporating them, if that makes sense. I'd say maybe yeah, I don't know.
There's a question that came in from Yaselda. She's wondering, do you always make a conscious choice when designing? It seems like nowadays we are applying the same designs over and over.
Yeah. And so that's actually what I was about to just say, is that I don't know that I consciously make decisions around this as I am creating high fidelity screens, like on a website or on an app. More likely what I would do is when I create the design system or prepare the design system for the product, I would think through these kind of principles. So for example, thinking through building out the objects on an 8-point grid system, making sure that everything is has uniformity in space and sizing and stuff like that. So it kind of comes more in the preparation than I'd say in the actual like creating of the high fidelity concepts. So hopefully that answers the question.
Cool. I think it does. Another attendee is asking, do you have to include all the laws when creating visuals?
No, I don't think so. And I actually tried to read up a bunch on that to see if like how people leverage it. I think if you end up trying to use them all the time, it might get a little busy, and it might be hard to make sure that you are like leveraging them all the time. I think these are more just like general like guiding principles. If you're thinking through like, hey, maybe my designs are looking like a little lackluster, maybe in our testing, people are having a hard time figuring this part out. It might be good to come back to these and be like, okay, like, you know, what are we doing that isn't resonating with individuals as they go through the app? You know, so it might be like, oh, like, you know, you're not quickly able to like identify these types of information as like associated. But yeah, so I wouldn't say that like these are like you build something and then make sure that to check this box. It's more just like kind of guiding principles as thinking through like just kind of general like best practices. So
Well, we have Maris Naylor here, and she's wondering, are there any of these laws that you think designers should violate in order to make things stand out?
Oh, probably. Yeah, and you see it all the time. I think a good designer could probably violate some of these to like make a point, and it might even create like more visual contrast, so it might draw the eye in more. I think when I'm thinking through these, I'm thinking through more from like a function standpoint. They definitely like help you to create situations where the user can quickly make perceptions about the information without having to work too hard. That's kind of the whole goal. Reduce ambiguity and make it so that I can easily find that button that submits the form, or you know, that whatever tag, so that I can click it and see more of a similar type of item. But I think if you were going to try to create something more aesthetically interesting, yeah, probably you would want to think of ways that maybe you could break these laws, and that probably gets more into you know, the kind of like aesthetics of it, and maybe like marketing approaches or some ways of like attracting the eye, because it might hold your attention longer, right? I mean, the whole goal with this is that we can make quick judgments and move on. But yeah, that's a great question, actually. It probably depends on the situation. If you're going for, you want a user to be able to accomplish a goal in a quick amount of time, yeah, make sure that you're following these. But if you want to, you know, create something interesting, yeah, break them.
Cool. We have someone else who is asking, can you speak to any major laws that are vastly different between a mobile app design versus a desktop design experience? And what are your favorite design tools for early mobile app designers?
For early mobile app designers, I think the laws are fairly applicable across both desktop and mobile. I'm trying to, let me think. I think that's a good question. I don't know that I've thought about this in terms of like a desktop versus a mobile situation. They kind of apply equally to both experiences. Maybe like the law of closure can be a little bit more interesting on a desktop because you have more real estate. So you have like more space to play with, and maybe you can do like interesting things because you're not so limited. But I would say like the laws kind of apply to both mobile and desktop kind of equally. So, and in terms of, was it tools to use for mobile design? Is that?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I always do is just paper and pencil, drawing it out. And I definitely don't think about these laws at all in that phase. But once you're getting more into the high fidelity, I've used a variety of different tools. I would say my favorite right now is definitely Figma. And the cool thing with Figma, and it's true of other tools like XD and Sketch, but you can find, if you don't want to build your own design system that already incorporates a lot of these laws, you can find ones out there. In fact, I'll shout one out that I use all the time called Cabana. But he's already done a great job of incorporating these laws into the design system so that when you go to build the mobile app, you are already have these principles incorporated into your designs. So he thinks through like the visual contrast of the grouping, different colors to use for backgrounds, and he does a really good job of like creating interesting like drop shadows, and puts it all on an 8-point grid. He actually like forces you to use it so that you can't even break the grid, and you'd have to like go into the settings to break it. So like if you're wanting to create something that incorporates this without having to do a lot of the legwork on creating your own design system and thinking through these decisions, I would definitely go find a design system out there that has put in a lot of work around this. And obviously like there's like material design from Google and like a bunch of others that have done it really well too. But if you're looking for like a cheap kind of open source alternative, there's definitely some on Figma that you can just go onto the community pages and find them there. So yeah.
Cool. A question, or my adaptation of a statement from Casey into a question. It seems like the principles would be tools to use while brainstorming refinements of a page. Can you tell us about sort of how you use these in thinking about how to refine a page or part of an application?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I do kind of when I'm doing like some kind of like audit of a visual design, when I go to a page and I'm trying to think of how to improve it, I definitely think through these kind of laws of grouping and see if there's any ways of optimizing it so that you can make decisions quicker or understand that information faster. Sometimes it's easy, it's just like more white space. And I know I sound like a broken record, but honestly, just like making the groupings more quickly identifiable. So yeah, I definitely think through like these as I'm doing some kind of like UI audit. There's actually some others too, but they're not like as easily applicable. But if you like just go to like the Gestalt psychology Wikipedia page, you'll see some others that are kind of interesting. They're just like not as easy to apply in a UI setting, but like they're interesting to think through, and they can help you kind of as you're brainstorming and thinking through this. So yeah, like there's been a bunch written about this, and it's like kind of a commonly referenced topic in visual design. So yeah, go check that out. I have some pretty good references in my citations that I can publish these slides if people are interested. So.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you for that. Two more questions for you. One person is wondering, how well do these laws test out during usability tests, or are these items that often don't get caught?
Oh, good question. I've definitely seen moments where I think that like a law was like maybe like not utilized correctly, where you are sending someone through like maybe like some kind of like maze testing, like they're supposed to like accomplish some kind of task, but they couldn't do it because they couldn't find some piece of information. And a lot of times it's because like we haven't grouped items properly, or it wasn't intuitive enough to find like, there wasn't enough continuity in the app to find that piece of information. So like I've said before, like I don't exactly like have these like alongside as I'm like doing like an audit or maybe testing with the user. But definitely if you're finding snags, this is like a great reference to come back to and say, okay, like something's not clicking here. Like, let's see if there's something better that we can do in terms of like creating something that's like less mentally costing to the user. And a lot of times just incorporating one of these, more white space, a better region, more similarity, maybe using like a more consistent color palette, maybe better sizing, some things like this. If something's not clicking with the user, like definitely you can leverage these to help address that. So
Cool. One more question from Pearl Mullings that I would probably also like to add to. Do you always keep these in mind while designing? And I'd like to add, at which phases in the design process are these most top of mind for you?
yeah, good question. So I would say that they're not, I don't keep them in mind at all when I'm doing low fidelity designs, and maybe someone else would disagree with that, but when I am thinking through, when I'm ideating on ways that we can display and capture information, if I'm doing it on paper or really low fidelity designs, I don't use these at all, just because I'm trying to capture more user flows and experience and making sure that like the feature requirements are being captured. And I'm not thinking about kind of optimizing visually that experience. So I would say on the low fidelity side, I don't use it. Just get like a pen or pencil on a piece of paper and like just start drawing out those flows. But once you get into the high fidelity stuff, that's what I was saying about the design system, is like using like a proper design system that you've maybe tweaked or massaged to like incorporate elements from that project, or using one that's like really thoughtful in using these laws of grouping. That's when you'll probably leverage these more, is creating that's when you're wanting to create something that like speaks to the user, because that's what they're going to interact with. Is they don't necessarily see the flows and where it's supposed to go, but they'll notice that that button spoke to them immediately, and they knew that, oh, in that right corner, like I found it immediately. And those are the type of things that like these laws of grouping like help with. So definitely in your like high fidelity visual designs, these are good to keep in mind. And when you're doing your design system, but I'd say like when you're doing your low fidelity brainstorming, ideating, yeah, probably no need to think about this. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kent, for sharing all of your wisdom and expertise in this domain with us. And thank you to everyone else for attending and spending your afternoon, morning, wherever you are, time with us today. And yeah, we've recorded this, so if you missed any part of it, we'll be sharing that out. And for those who weren't there in the beginning, Def Method is currently hiring for multiple roles. So if you liked what you heard today, please pop onto our website, defmethod.com, to learn more about what we're hiring for. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.